So as usual, we are going to make a start with what we oops, I am clicking on the wrong stuff. I would like to start off by calling on each one. If you have anything to recall from last week's session. Anyone would like to share with us what they have learned last week before we move on to what we are looking at this week? Anyone?
I'll give one answer. Last week, we've looked at the summative assessment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Summative assessment. But it's echoing.
No, it's okay. It's only from your end.
Okay. Summative assessment, especially blueprints, solo taxonomy, and Bloom.
Okay, thank you. And has anyone start working or thinking about which one they would like to use? Anyone who is joining in this afternoon has actually used any of those? Or we are all waiting until the end of this term?
I am using solo taxonomy.
Okay. And do you use it for summative or for formative assessment?
For summative only.
Summative assessment. Okay, thank you, Telma. Anyone else who would like to share their learning from last week before we start this week? We start the day. Okay, there's no one who would like to share what they have learned last week. We will go on straight to our session for this afternoon. So once again, welcome, and this is week 6. Soon we will be ending this semester, and I am once again inviting you to make sure that you're logging in the Moodle, accessing your learning content, and attending to each one of them as best as you can. This afternoon, we will be looking at subtopic H for assessment, which is formative, and we should also have summative assessment and blueprint planning. But because we've already looked at summative assessment, so this afternoon we will only be looking at formative assessment. And also looking at an example of how do we do a blueprint planning for a formative assessment. So formative assessment, by definition, it is a planned, ongoing process used by all students and teachers during learning and teaching to elicit and use evidence of student learning to improve the student understanding of intended disciplinary learning outcomes and support students to become self-directed learners. So if you look at it compared to summative, formative is an in-class daily process that involves both the student and the teacher. But more importantly, the students should know that they are part of the assessment process. As we look at formative assessment, it is a type of assessment for learning. So it is not only to meet the requirements of the national assessment standards or provincial, but it serves as instructional guide during the learning process. So instructional guides are usually the teaching and learning process that this is referring to. And also it is mentioned by Rick Stickens. And this person wrote that assessment for learning provides both the students and the teachers with understandable information in a form they can use immediately to improve performance. So students can also become self-assessors, and consumers of assessment information. Point number 3, as students gain better insight into their own learning, they will be able to take ownership over performance and even feel a greater sense of success mapped to their efforts. So in this regard, it is meaning that when we design assessment tasks for formative, we must make sure that we inform the students that this is what we expect you to do, and it comes in the terms of marking criteria or rubrics that will guide them so they're within the scope and they understand what is expected of them. Also, using formatives the right way, we can yield or we can produce a lot of rich diagnostic information and establish a clear learning progression for your students, regardless of their current mastery. And the end, it says, formative assessment helps teachers to build understanding of their learners and modify teaching for maximum impact. It will also empower students and help them learn how they learn. Next one, we look at how often or what exactly is formative assessment. First point is that it should be frequent. Okay, formative assessment must be given throughout the learning process. Some informal, and it can be used on a daily basis. Others can be formal, and it can happen several times a week. If assessments are given every 3 weeks in a 13-week time frame, there would be insufficient data to make it formative, so therefore it will become summative. The other one is it should be directly related to skills and knowledge. Formative assessment is about what students need to know and able to do. They must directly relate to specific skills and learning targets students are working on and content they are learning. Number 3, it has to be specific in the feedback provided. A certain grade on an assessment is too vague to help teachers to students. So in fact, grades really are not important in formative assessment, but it is how you understand the learning target or demonstration of the mastery of the skills that is far more important than the grade. So what is critical is that students must have a very clear understanding of how they're doing based on what they need to go, where to go, and this requires interaction and feedback from the teacher. For example, we are doing all this, but sometimes we do not realize that this is formative assessment. When you give scores or you give feedback, when the students are doing an activity, that is already part of formative assessment. Also, when you address them directly and say, yes, what you're saying is correct or what you're saying is not correct, that is also part of formative assessment as well. Now let's look at the next point that says, what is not formative assessment? What is not formative assessment? The first one is measuring recall. Okay, when we do a test and say this is a formative assessment, but then we require the students to recall what they have already learned. So understanding and application goes beyond deeper than mere recall of facts. This is the key in formative assessment. How students perform.
Sorry, Mrs. Morris, can you share your screen, please?
I've shared my screen, but you're not seeing it?
No.
No.
Oh. Okay, wait. Maybe I'll close and start over again. I'm not sure what's happening. Share the screen. Can you see now?
Yes.
So which part did I stop at that you did not see? All of it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so it means I have to go start over again, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking at the formative assessment and blueprint this afternoon. And just so for those of you who have already been listening, formative assessment is a plan, ongoing process used by all students and teachers during learning and teaching. And it has to use evidence of student learning to improve student understanding of intended discipline or subject areas and support students to become self-directed learners. Now, we are looking at formative. It should be the type of assessment for learning. And it is not about using it to meet provincial or national standards of assessment, but they should serve as instructional guide during the learning process, meaning that they should inform us in our teaching and planning and learning. This is what formative assessment is about. I have gone through the other ones, so you can follow at your own time. Let's move on to what is formative assessment. The first one is frequent. It should be done either several times or on a daily basis, but they should be planned. But if we are doing it, for example, every 3 weeks or within a 13 weeks time frame, that is not formative assessment. It has become summative assessment. The next point is directly related to skills or knowledge. Formative assessment is about assessing the skills and the knowledge of each subject area or whatever that we are teaching the students and we expect them to master. It is not about recalling, and they must directly relate to specific skills and learning targets that students are working on and on the content they're learning. Number 3 is specific in the feedback provided. In formative assessment, the feedback given should be on the spot, on a particular week, on a particular day. Either it is written or verbally given. We are actually carrying out some form of formative assessment. And in fact, as it is stated here, grades really are not important in formative assessment. It is about how you understand the learning target or demonstrate the mastery of the skill is far more important.
Excuse me, Mrs. Morris. I'm not seeing anything.
Once again, sorry?
I'm not seeing anything from my end. Are you sharing your screen, Mrs. Morris?
Yes, I've shared the screen. What about the others? Can you see the screen?
No.
I'm not sure what is with this thing. Wait. Can you see the screen?
We can see the screen, but it's only on one page. And the documents are not open.
Oh, you're not seeing the whole screen.
No, nothing.
Okay, give me a minute.
Now we can see. Okay.
Should be screen 2, screen 1. Okay, so shall we continue?
Yes.
Right, so as I was stating about this specific in the feedback provided, we must make sure that when we are providing feedback, it is to help the students to show that how well they understand a targeted learning area. And also, it has to be clear. What exactly do we want them to improve on, or how well are they doing in a subject area of assessment? It has to be really clear. Next one is, what is not formative assessment? There are three main things or elements that we must know that they are not formative assessment in. One of them is measuring recall. Understanding and application goes much deeper than mere recalling of facts. So this is a key in formative assessment. We're not just looking at how well students perform on a test, but whether they understand the underlying concepts and can apply this learning to a new context. For example, when we are doing a spelling test, we are actually asking the students to memorize spelling words, and then they spell the word correctly without looking at it. So that is a classic example of measuring recall. But the question is, can they use the words on their own in another sentence or in another context? For high school students, we can say that the student may be able to define gravity, but do they understand the principles behind that concept and can they apply it? So asking students to merely recall facts, for example, recalling memorizing spelling or multiple choice, those are not formative assessment. The second one is ongoing assessment. If we give a lot of quiz, that doesn't mean that we are administering formative assessment. It just means we're giving a lot of shorter term summative assessment. And that's unless you're using those quizzes as data to inform your teaching and your students about their learning. The third one is small assessment. Formative is not defined by or determined by the size of the assessment. It's more about how it's used. So if you say, oh, it's an end of topic test, or it's just a short one specifically for this substrand, that is not formative. It is still summative in some sort. Next one, we as part of a school, we must know that first and foremost, the lifeblood of school improvement is the student academic data. So we cannot depend on the overall yearly or termly ones to inform us that students have performed over a period of time. Therefore, we as educators, we need a sound program of ongoing formative assessment. As we have mentioned in our previous meeting together, that schools should have assessment policy. And that is not only about summative assessment, but also must incorporate formative assessment as well. The next one is that co-teachers will continually, as students progress, using a variety of techniques. Some as informal as routine class questioning or listening to students read. This ongoing flow of information enables students to respond to students immediately with corrective feedback. Other more formal assessment tools include unit tests, performance tasks, and projects. And regardless of the format, the chosen tools must provide regular information about what students have learned. And in terms of the whole school, and let's look at what we should be doing. We as teachers must pay close attention to alignment. Does the assessment match the learning goals on the basing guide and the standards being assessed? If so, then the assessment should have some predictive quality and at least enough to reveal which students need additional instruction and in which area. Teachers must make plans for addressing the students' needs in staff meetings. It's not about positing, but it's providing information about students' academic performances and how each teacher in a school can help each other to define or design better formative assessment practices. I am not going to read the other one, but it says the power of formative assessment increases when teachers of the same content area design and administer common assessment. So this will be helpful for those of us who are teaching in schools, especially where we have double stream or we have triple or more than one stream. Then you don't have to kill yourself to prepare formative assessment by yourself, you can always consult with the teachers teaching the same level within your school, and you can share information so that within a grade level, you can assess and help your students better. Next one, we are coming almost to the end. This is an example of a formative assessment blueprint. Other people can design this differently, but this is just a daily one that you can look at and inform yourself how it is done. Now, last week, someone was asking about how do you go about grading a formative assessment? If you're looking at the screen, it will still have the usual year level, the subject, the strand, substrand, your substrand, outcome, and your indicator. Because in the indicator, it is where it will help you to identify what specific skill did you wish for your students to acquire and that you are assessing while you are teaching them. So for this one here is just an example of how we can use a spelling step as a formative assessment task. So formative assessment task, and it is important that what you should have in your program. If you mind my asking, why are the year 2 joining our Zoom? Tolson, Violet? Anyway, shall I continue? Like in your, the difference between a formative and summative assessment is you will normally see in a summative assessment the number of specific learning outcomes or indicators. There should be more than one, whereas in formative you could only just use one because it's specific. And also, if you are looking at the screen that I am sharing, you have skills and knowledge. So what are the skills and knowledge that you are going to assess through formative assessment? So in this example of spelling words, the skills and knowledge, and then the criteria for spelling words. So skills and knowledge, you have the children should be able to identify the words. They should be able to explain the meaning of the words, use the words in their own sentences, and they should distinguish the words and other words with similar meaning. In the criteria that you will use for marking, criteria for the spelling words, I'm only using 2, but you could use more. The child can spell well or still need help. In the explaining the meaning of the words, it's the same thing across. And I've only chosen 4 words: rough, smooth, calm, and vivid. Now, you might think that where are these words coming from? They must come from a text that the students have come in contact with. Not just listing them on the board for the sake of listing them, but they should be some part of the students' learning. So the difference is in this one here, there is no marking, there is no grades given. There are no scores given because we want to test the skill and the knowledge that the students should acquire. So by the end of this assessment, if you go around and the child did not spell the word correctly to you, then you can circle need help. Explain the meaning of the word. You can also indicate need help. Use words in their own sentence. Maybe they are good at it, so you can say well. In other criteria, they could be different. Okay, so this is just an example for a symbol. Everyday spelling activity or weekly activity, you can do this. But you need to make sure that you have a plan and you decide what day of the week you're using it. It does not have to be separated from what you're doing in your daily task. So all the activities that you have listed down in your lesson plan for a particular subject, you can actually use it as a formative assessment instead of creating a different one. Next, I will show you another example of a formative assessment blueprint. So for this one here, the assessment type will base on reading observation for grade 2. So we have the name, the date, the reading is The Dancing Fly. And this is the author and the illustrator of the book. Now, these are the questions that have been asked, and they follow the set of levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So for the knowledge question, it can be what is the title of the story, which character appears first in the story. Comprehension question, in your own words, tell what the story is about. Application question, select the main characteristics in the story and think of something you would do if he comes to your house. Analysis question, what part of the story was the funniest or the most exciting or the saddest? The synthesis or the analysis question, write a poem about the story. And for evaluation, what's the main character in the story, a good character or a bad character, and why you think he or it is a good or bad character. Moving on, it can have a marking criteria. For this person here, this is done by actually one of us. So it can be at the end, they are giving a grade, but normally it should not have any grade except a correct response, incorrect response, no response. So it can be just an observation through oral questions, or it can be done in written as well. So whichever method we choose to use for formative, it can be either through oral, it can be hands-on, it can be written, or it can be just done orally as well. So those are the two examples, except for this one here, the marks are allocated at the end. Yes, we can use it, but to what extent and how are we going to use this information here? And concluding, we must know that it's planned, ongoing. It's a planned, ongoing process. All students and teachers are engaged in it. It is elicit and use evidence of student learning, and it will support students to become self-directed learners. Now, in these two examples that we have, I have shown you, are you still with me?
Yes.
Okay, let's go back to the spelling. So how do we engage students in this? It means that all the criteria, the skills and knowledge, they are done with the students, and you can actually have one-on-one session with the students to explain that. See, you can identify the words that's observable. You were able to explain the meaning of the words, but you are not able to use the words in your own sentence, and that is where they take ownership and they try their best that how am I going to use them in my own words? So you do an example with them probably, or you allow them to identify the words in the sentences written by someone else, so that it helps them to actually see where their weaknesses are and they can improve on. And that is where we allow students to become part of the assessment process, and also they take ownership for their learning. And that is all for this afternoon. If you have any questions or comments, please do so in regards to formative assessment blueprint. I am going to stop sharing the screen. But feel free, unless I'm going to leave it for a few minutes, unless you want us to go through any part of the slides again. You tend to talk, so please do so.
Thank you, Mrs. Morris. Now it is clear what you have explained for formative. I've understand it and I will try and use it in my lessons.
You're welcome. But as just one thing to add on while I have stopped sharing the screen, but make sure that when you are setting your skills and knowledge, you're setting your criteria, you must make sure that they align with either the Bloom's taxonomy or the Solo taxonomy.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm only using a symbol one this afternoon, but feel free to apply this to any subject area. And I would like to encourage you, if you can try one formative assessment next week, and in our next session next week, you can share what you've actually prepared and what was the outcome. Anyone else would like to share anything that they think it's worthwhile? No? Right, if there's no more, I am going to stop the recording.